Welcome back to Bold Like a Leopard. We're going to do another audio podcast. I actually tried recording two in the past couple days, and they turned out fine in terms of audio. But apparently, Podbean has a limit to how many you can upload if you have the free account, and I'm not quite ready to sink any money into it. So I'm going to do it using this phone's audio recorder. The big story, of course, today is the situation with Nina Jankowicz, or Scary Poppins as they were calling her. This is a woman who was supposed to be heading what was called, and is still apparently going to happen, the Disinformation Governance Board, and what its critics are calling a Ministry of Truth. And I would characterize this as one of the greatest bloody noses that the Biden administration has suffered so far. Now, what do I mean by a bloody nose? This is something that is a huge public embarrassment to them. When you nominate someone and your party has control of Congress, especially the Senate, and in this case, she didn't even require confirmation. This isn't a cabinet level position, so she wouldn't have required actual confirmation. So this is even worse. And that person basically quits before they even start the job. It becomes a real embarrassment for the administration, because it shows that they don't know how to get their ducks in a row. They don't know how, one of the phrases that the Democrats like to do and like to use, and it's something that I've noticed, especially among people on the centrist part of the Democratic Party, is they like to claim that we know how to get things done. And this is a phrase that Biden has used. This is also something that Hillary Clinton has used. She says that she's a progressive who gets things done, as opposed to one like Bernie Sanders, who has very idealistic values, but doesn't really have that much support because and can't get his stuff through Congress because he's simply on the fringe and he can't get people to cross over onto his side of the aisle. He can't even get people on his own side of the aisle to support him. Well, the Biden administration has basically proven that it's an administration that can't really get things done. What do I mean by that? So let's put aside the appointment of this woman, Nina Jankowicz, Scary Poppins, that is now off the table, even though there were no procedural obstacles to it because she resigned preemptively. So the worst bloody noses that they've gotten are the Supreme Court ruling against the eviction moratorium. That's one that I keep remembering. It's not the worst one, so this isn't in order of importance. Another one was the failure of Build Back Better. Another one was the big, and this might be the biggest, but it's probably going to be topped by a lot of the economic troubles that are ahead. The withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was a huge disaster. It destroyed Biden's polling numbers at the time, and they've never truly recovered from them. They've tried to climb back up a little bit, and they've never reached those values. That was actually a watershed moment when I think many people who were like, well, things are at least tolerable under Biden, they started to realize that lives and both the lives and the security of the United States are actually under risk with this guy in office. So, and then there's been many others. There was the overturning of the vaccine mandate. There's going to be the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That will be a huge one. There is also the election in Virginia, right? So you could keep going for days. The Biden administration it's like an L factory. He just keeps taking L's. So anyway, Nina Jankowicz is also a major, and this is an unforced error. See, some of the problems that come up, you can't necessarily avoid because they're part of the job, right? If you are an administration that is governing a budget, you're trying to put forward budget priorities, you're trying to put forward a legislative agenda. So these are things you can't avoid. He had to put forward the Build Back Better agenda or something else. or people would have accused him of reneging on a number of his campaign promises. He had to figure out what to do with Afghanistan, whether to withdraw or remain, or people would start to ask, like, what are you doing? Well, where was your commitment to get out of there? Like, what are you doing now that? And by the way, I think getting out of Afghanistan was the right idea, and I think Biden was right about that. I think Trump was right about that. I think Obama in his time was trying to figure out ways to withdraw from Afghanistan, not successfully, but the execution was wrong. So it's not as if it was an unforced error necessarily to leave Afghanistan. The unforced errors were in the execution. What happened with Nina Jankowicz was actually an unforced error, meaning that the Biden administration created a new body that had a new function that nobody had ever had before within the U.S., at least not in this form, right? There had been agencies like the U.S. Information Service, or USIS, I think it's also called the USIA, which was active during the Vietnam War. And they were largely in charge of putting out war propaganda and bullshit like that. So there have been forms of this in the past, and I think there was a similar thing back during World War II. And now I guess the justification is that we have so many critical issues at hand right now in terms of COVID, in terms of the war in Ukraine, which they, in many ways, they liken to World War II, even though they refuse to state whether they think America is actually at war with Russia. So what's going on is that they created this body within the government, and they nominated a person to that body, and it blew up in their faces totally because the Biden administration selected Nina Jankowicz not because of any capabilities, not because of any accomplishments, but because of her politics and her beliefs and her personality. And it came to bite them in the ass, because most people who are living outside of the DC, Maryland, Virginia area know that this is a person who shouldn't be in any way in charge of anything anyone else says, because she can't control what she says. We talked about types of bloody noses. There have been a couple before it that are at least similar, but I think this one takes the case in terms of poor nominations that have just imploded for the Biden administration. The first one, okay, this was actually a pretty important one. There's the Office of Management and Budget. That's the one that the White House has. That's a person who basically is within the executive branch, who puts forward budgetary priorities for the administration that then get input to Congress, okay? And, I guess the parallel in Congress, and I might be like exaggerating a little bit, but their counterpart, I think, would be the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. So Nina Jankowicz, their nominee, the Biden White House's nominee, was Neera Tanden, who's best known as being the head of the Center for American Progress and being just a major Clintonista. She's someone who's always bashed on the progressive wing of the party and Bernie Sanders. She's always bashed on people who break left within the party, and sometimes also with people who are too far to the center, right? So she is the standard, Clintonian Democrat, somebody who is for big government and for intervention overseas. So possibly the worst type, right? Because she doesn't have she's not pro-business, and she's also not pro-peace, and she's definitely not pro-freedom. So Neera Tanden was nominated, and it blew up in the faces of the Democrats because she had a long history of especially abrasive tweets about certain members of Congress and the Senate that were, I guess, beyond the pale of professional dignity. And one of the people that was included in that list happened to be Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from West Virginia. And Manchin said, "Yeah, this is kind of a no for me, because of the things that she's expressed in the past and the ways that she's, and I think it was totally personal on his part. It also might have been red meat to throw at the people in West Virginia who they were looking for justification to keep supporting him, because as a Democrat, you're kind of up the creek in terms of being electable in West Virginia nowadays. It's interesting, nobody really wants to reckon with on the Democratic side the fact that only about 12 years ago, the Democrats were very strong in West Virginia. They actually had, I believe, 2 seats in the Senate from West Virginia, and a couple of seats in the House. And the Tea Party revolution wiped out some of that, and then it's just kept going down. And Manchin is basically the last Mohican. And sorry if I get canceled for saying that, but he's the last of the Mohicans in West Virginia. He's the last West Virginia Democrat elected at the federal level. He's the last West Virginia Democrat of any note serving in any capacity. The state has gone completely red, and even the governor defected in his time in his first term. He defected from the Democrats and became a Republican. And look, I get it that the GOP under Trump is certainly not the party for everyone, and Trump himself has made a lot of mistakes. But the Democrats have been piss poor outreach to people in rural areas, and I think it's actually a problem when you have only one party that's capable of getting elected in any state. You get basically a lot of rot and calcification where people just stay in office forever. You see it a little bit in Alaska and in Arkansas and states like that are Republican, and you for sure see it in many Democratic run cities like in LA and in Philadelphia, in Chicago for many years, and now there's worse problems. I think that you need a healthy system with 2 parties, but they have to be 2 parties that give actual meaningful alternatives to each other that aren't necessarily terrible. And we don't have that in the US. We actually have a party that has, you have a party that has ideas that are going to destroy the country. That's the Democrats. And you have a party that has ideas that are helping no one, and that's the Republicans. And Neera Tanden, anyway, she was the first person who the Biden administration nominated who got shot down, and her failed nomination was one of the first dominoes to fall in his gradual descent into being an all-time failure. Okay, he ended up hiring her into the White House as basically a senior advisor, and that's what she does up until now. So for those of you that think that one setback in life will end your career, you just have to be in the right industry. You have to be some sort of think tank director and have literally no sense of irony and self-reflection, and you'll do fine in life. Nobody will ever get rid of you. They'll always try to make you welcome at the party and in the party. In this case, that was her. The second person who was also a catastrophic disaster for the Biden administration, someone who basically his nomination, it basically becomes an exclamation point on the failures of the administration, was David Chipman. David Chipman was nominated to be the head of the ATF. I think it's a director position. And he'd been an ATF agent, and the reason that he was, his nomination was torpedoed was because, again, this is a person who is a total activist, a total gun control freak, and to put him in charge of the agency when he clearly wants to have it act above and beyond its legal limits. Many people, even Democratic senators, I think that it wasn't just Joe Manchin, it might have been a few others who came back to Biden and said, yeah, there's no way we're going to support this guy. We're going to basically get a revolt in our states. I think Montana might have been one. There was Senator John Tester of Montana, and certainly Joe Manchin, I think, was one of the senators who shot it down. And they said, yeah, this is outrageous. You have a person who all they talk about is assault weapons bans and how, they're a gun owner, but they don't think other people should be a gun owner because it has to be within the right hands and everything. David Chipman was, now some people who live in major metropolitan areas and they've never been out in the country, I'm actually driving through some very rural areas right now in Ohio, as I'm doing this recording. And police response times are pretty high, right? They can't be there every second of the day. Whenever you have, let's say if there's an intruder in your house, or you have somebody who's trying to steal something of yours, whether it's stealing your motorcycle, stealing your your Jeep or whatever it is over here. If you can't relate to that, it's because you may live in an area where you have very quick police response times, and you don't think that you need a weapon to defend yourself. That's probably an erroneous assumption, but that might be why you think that way. And the fact is that in many of those states, people are like, are you insane? This isn't about hunting. This is about our ability to defend our property, defend our, defend ourselves from criminals. This is, and people don't understand that. They think that if you're a gun-owning American, that you must be some sort of ideological freak. It's astounding sometimes how many people think like David Chipman, because I think that he has been able to find a niche among some of these school marms and people who, they have the tote bag that they got from their local library, that they think, they feel safety is an entitlement. They feel like they're entitled to safety. They can't understand why people litter. They don't understand the human condition. So they don't understand why people commit crimes, and therefore they don't understand why you would want to protect yourself from someone who commits crimes, a criminal. So they can't understand it. And of course, there are other reasons why we have the Second Amendment. The main reason, of course, was that the founders were seeking to keep the ability of self-defense also against tyranny within the hands of the citizenry, right? The idea of a well-regulated militia was not an issue of keeping the National Guard, because the National Guard only appeared, I think, like a couple generations after the Constitution was ratified. So that whole theory goes by the wayside. The Founding Fathers envisioned people owning modern weapons, but they didn't yet envision an actual National Guard, like the actual, there were militias, and they were organized by the state, but it was a very ad hoc situation. Anyway, sorry to go off on that long tangent, but David Chipman was a disaster of a nomination. I think he got even less support than Neera Tanden. And this whole thing with Nina Jankowicz is possibly worse, not because of the level of support, but because apparently, this isn't a position where you would actually even need Senate approval. What happened was there were calls to have her come to hearings and be questioned by Senate panels, about some of the duties of the Disinformation Governance Board. And it had already been a disaster when her boss, Homeland Security Director Alejandro Mayorkas, had been, there to discuss it. And he said, yeah, we didn't really review her social media history and her past expressions before we nominated her. Well, then how exactly are you supposed to know if she's the appropriate person to deal with disinformation? I mean, it's a very, it's almost like, if you're doing a very serious job, if you're trying to be taken seriously, you always have to make sure that the communications that you put forward are ones that position you to be taken seriously, right? There's people who have been in, they've been in professional life for many, many years. They don't know how to compose an email. They don't know how to, mail a letter. They don't know how to do, and they do get by, but do they get to the top of the totem pole? they usually have to do something else in order to do that. I don't know how Alejandro Mayorkas did it, and I don't know how Nina Jankowicz did it, but it's very apparent that these are people who their perception of themselves is, and whether they're appropriate for the jobs that they're in is only through the prism of people like themselves. They can't relate to people outside of the Beltway of Washington, D.C. And therefore, when they appoint other people, as was done in this case with Nina Jankowicz, they don't understand how these people are perceived outside of Washington, D.C. and outside of the bubble of their personal biases, right? And that, I think, is the real lesson here, that you need often people that are, capable of being in a high-pressure situation and are versatile to, different types of people that they deal with. And I think that the majority of Democrats right now in government positions, they're used to a certain culture that is insulated from the rest of America. Okay, I don't think that anybody would disagree with that. You have a whole consumer culture there that's different. You have a whole, there's certain, educational expectations that are different. I was actually reading today that there's a lot of employers now in the private sector that are saying, well, we don't actually need a college degree. We're actually willing to forego it. So these are issues that, I was saying that because in government, in many of these civil service positions, they look at you having a degree and they're like, well, okay, so he has a degree, he or she has a degree. That means that they know what they're doing. That's very seldomly the case in the industry that I'm in. You get asked a lot more about the accomplishments you have in previous positions that you're in. And let me be honest, I think that sometimes you end up wondering if that person next to you has done things that are like 5 times as good as what you've done, right? Because it's very hard to compare the two, compare apples to apples, because as engineers, coming from 2 different companies, the applications are hardly the same. And unlike that, in government, it's very standardized, right? So Nina Jankowicz came from a very standardized situation of academia / I think she went to Georgetown, by the way. But yeah, or maybe it was Columbia. But she was in academia. I think she was also in a different government position before. And of course, she had been a very activist person. And those should have all been red flags that you shouldn't have this person in such a visible capacity. And that was only the second mistake. The first mistake was actually creating this so-called Disinformation Governance Board. I think that's going to be it for now. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute, on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, Subscribe Star. You can find me on Substack, Telegram, Minds, Gab, and Getter. And I think that's all of them. Have a great day. Bye.